Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, we will talk about message size restrictions on Exchange server. Message size restrictions can be applied on the emails which are received from external users or the messages which are received from internal users. So this is basically applied on the sent and received emails on different levels in Exchange server. So whenever the message size is exceeding the limits specified on the Exchange server, the message will not be sent through and it will be discarded at one of the checks which happens on the Exchange transport pipeline. So it is very essential to manage the required message size limits on Exchange. There are multiple types of message size limits on Exchange server. First and foremost is the whole message size limit, which includes the message header, the message body, and any other attachments on the message itself. The second size limit is attachment size limit. So this specifies the maximum size of attachment in a message. You may have multiple smaller attachments on the email. However, the total email size should not exceed the whole message size limit. So that should also be taken care. And the last one is message header limits. This specifies the maximum size of message header fields in the message. This will not consider the whole message body or the attachment size, as the header contains only the plain text, and the message header size is determined by the number of characters on each header field and by the total number of header fields. So these are some of the message size limits available on the Exchange server. And these limits can be applied on the organization level, connector level, server level, and mailbox recipient levels. The organizational limits can be applied using the transport rule or the transport config on the Exchange. The connector limits will be applied on the send connector or the receive connectors. And the server limits are applied on the Exchange server. And this applies to specific mailbox server or edge transport server. And this can be independently applied on each mailbox server or Exchange edge transport server. And the last one will be the recipient limits, which is applied on the mailbox itself for the sent and received emails. For the incoming emails, which are sent from the external network, the email path will always be from top to bottom. As we see, we have connector limits, we have organizational limits, we have server limits and recipient limits for receiving the emails, and this will be the same in case of sending an email. However, on the external end, you will have the send connector instead of receive connector there. So let's consider a scenario where you have set the limits like 50 MB on the connector and 35 MB on the organizational limits, 50 MB on server limits, and recipient limits. As I have already stated here, most restrictive is enforced always. So let's say you are receiving an external email from external party or external sender from a public domain like Gmail, Yahoo Mail, or somewhere else. So that email will first be checked at the connector level, which is our receive connector. So this should always be higher than the organizational limit. So if the organization limit is more than the receive connector limit, then the email which is coming here will be discarded here and it will not pass through the receive connector, as this is not required, and will be discarded at organizational limit even though it passes through the receive connector. So it will be discarded at receive connector end itself. And for the external emails, the server limits will be bypassed and it will be directed to recipient limits. The recipient limit should be more or equal to most restrictive one on the organizational or connector limits. So the overall email, which is coming from external, which will have the limit of 35 MB, which is organizational limit, which is more restrictive on all these three limits. So let's consider a scenario when you are sending an email internally to internal user within your organization. As this is sent within the organization and within the internal users, this will only check the server limits in case the sender is on the server 1 and the recipient is on server 2. If both sender and recipient are in the same server, then the server limits will be ignored. So in this case, it is better to maintain the same limits on server and recipient limits to avoid any issues on mail flow. As I said, most restrictive will always win. So in both of this, for the incoming email, the most restrictive is this. And when it comes to recipient limit, we have more than organizational limit. So the 35 MB limit will be enforced on the incoming emails from the external user. For the internal emails, it will always check for the server limits in case sender and recipient both are in different mailbox servers. Otherwise, only the recipient limit who is receiving the email will be checked before delivering the email to the recipient's mailbox. So in case of outgoing emails, the way of transport will be from bottom to top. So if you have max send quota, which is set to 50 MB on server limits on recipient limits, first it will be checking the recipient limit and then go to server limit in case of internal users and the users resides on multiple different servers. However, if the sender and recipients both are in the same mailbox server, the limit on sender's end will be applied for the outgoing emails. However, for the external emails, the organizational limits and send connector limits will apply. So if you have 50 MB on the organizational limit and 35 MB on the send connector limit and you are sending 40 MB of mail, then this will be discarded at the organizational limit itself. However, if you configure the way which I am showing here, the organizational limit will be having 35 MB and send connector having 50 MB. So it will always check the organizational limit, which is most restrictive and enforced on the email. So finally, it will have 35 MB of limit for the external email. So I hope the concepts are understood. Even though these are very simple concepts, it can be confusing in some cases. However, if you work through this and configure the limits properly, you should not have any issues in the future mail flow. So let's go to our Exchange server and see some of these limits which are set on the Exchange server by default after the Exchange is installed. So this is our Exchange server. Let's go to PowerShell. First, let's see the organizational level limits for send and receive emails. To do that, we will use get transport config and we will select max receive size and max send size. As you can see, both are set to 10 MB on the organizational level using transport config. This is the whole message size limit. However, by default, there are no limits added for the attachment, and the attachment limits can be set using the transport rule. And if you see get transport rule, there are no transport rule created by default on the Exchange server, and the attachment sizes are not managed at the organizational level by default. So let's check the connector levels. By default, there are no send connectors, so there is no limitation on the sending. However, if you do the receive connector, which is get receive connector and select max message size, we can see this is set to 36 MB by default on all the receive connectors. If I just add the name here, you can see the receive connector name. There is also the header limit, which is added on the connector. You can see using the max header size as well, which is set to 256 KB on each connector by default. You can also set some of these size limits on the Active Directory site, which can check by get AD site link and use select to see max message size limit, which is set to unlimited as of now by default. So these are some of the limitations which are set on the connector level. When we check the limitations on the recipient end, we have multiple types of recipients. For example, we have distribution list, we have dynamic distribution list, we have mailbox, we have contact, we have mail user, we have public folder, we also have site mailbox, and so on. So we can check the limitations using get mailbox and select max receive size for this, and also do max send size. As you see, this is set to unlimited on the recipient end. Let's add name over here and check the same for distribution group, which is also set to unlimited. Let's check the dynamic distribution group limits. This is also set to unlimited on the recipient end. So as we saw on the hierarchy in the image previously, the recipient limits are set to unlimited or it is set to high. So the internal communications or internal email transaction can happen even though the message size limits are higher. And the restrictions are set on the top level where we are sending an email to external or where we are receiving an email from the external users. So we have discussed most of these limitations as of now. So let's go to over and see how this works in the real life scenario. Let's log into over. Let's create a new email and we will just copy this text and create a new email. This should be fine. We will add test1 and we will send it to like all users. This should be fine. So let's click on new to create new email and we will select all users again and we will give the subject as test2. We will provide some of the text. And as you know, these are all text and the message size is very less. So let's add attachment, which is 8 MB. As you can see, this has been uploaded. As you see, if I try to attach another attachment, we get the error or the mail tip which says attachment was not added because that would exceed the maximum size limit, which is 10 MB, and it gives the file name here. So this is the whole message size limit, which we saw as 10 MB on the organizational level in the PowerShell. Let's go back to command. These are the limits which are taking place here. So you get this warning when you try to send the email which is exceeding the limits. Let's discard this and use this command to set transport config and max send size. We will set it as 20 MB for all the messages. So this would allow emails to be sent up to 20 MB. However, while receiving, you only have limitation. So let's go back to ECP and click on new, select all users. Let's add some text. We will call this as test2, and we will try to add attachment, which is 8 MB, and we will try to add another attachment, which I'm going to copy the same file with this different name. So this is like more than 10 MB, around 16 MB we have here. However, we can still send this email. As you see, we receive a NDR for this particular users, and it says your message is too large to send. So make it smaller by removing the attachment or something like that. This message is around 16 MB. This is the common error when you have larger send size and smaller receive size on the transport config. So let's change this back. As we saw earlier, there are no transport rule to control the attachment size limits. So let's try to create a new rule and try to limit the attachment size for each emails. So let's go back to ECP. Let's go to mail flow, and in the rules tab, click on plus, create new rule. Let's name this as email attachment limit. So click on more options, and in the apply this rule if section, select any attachment and select the size is greater than equal to, and here you need to enter the attachment size limit in KB. So let's use Google to convert MB to KB, which is 10,000. Copy this and go back to our ECP. So mention 10,000 here and click OK. As you can see, we have 9.77 MB limit here. And in the do following or the action, select this and block the messages with the explanation. And let's give the explanation as okay, let's use this as an explanation, and let's reduce this to 5 MB because we have 10 MB as the whole message size limit, and change it here as well. I will change it to 5,000. That should be 5 MB, and I will click on save. So once I have this, let's go back to our OVA and refresh the page. Click on new. Let's select all users and let's make it as test4. I will leave the body as blank and attach this 8 MB file and send the email. As you see, we have the delivery failure and the message which we mentioned, like this email contains the attachment which exceeds the size of 5 MB. Please reduce the overall attachment size limits. This is how you can control the attachment size limits using organizational level of limits in Exchange Server. As we know, 10 MB for the whole message is very less, so we will increase it to 25 MB, and for the max receive size also we will set it to 25 MB on our organization. So after this, we will use the get transport rule to see the transport rule which we just created. Let's use this command and select using the size here. So this is attachment size over 5 MB it is. So let's set this back to 10 MB. So we have the whole email size as 25 MB and attachment size limit at least for 10 MB. So if we go back to the ECP and refresh here, you should see the 10 MB here. I think this is pretty much enough for my organization. However, you may need to set it to higher values based on your email transactions on your Exchange servers, and you may need to tweak this size limits once in a while. You can also set the limits on recipient end using set mailbox if you want to set the limits on the mailbox. And if you want to set the limits on distribution group, you can use set distribution group and use max receive size or max send size and enter the desired value over there. Let's clear screen. So for now, we have 36 MB of limit on receive connector. And on the transport rule, we have 10 MB of attachment size limits. And on the transport config, we have 25 MB of limits on overall email size. This looks pretty much good for my environment. If you need to tweak based on the requirement you have on your Exchange environment, please use this command and make the changes as required. So that's it for this video. I hope this was informative and see you on the next one.